Hello friends, my name is JJ, and because social media knows me better than I know myself, I have been getting a lot of ads on Instagram lately for nostalgic Canadian middle-class knickknacks. Let me show you a couple. So, I don't know much about music, but my understanding is that this is what they call a guitar pedal. It's like a thing that modifies the sound a guitar makes in some manner. Anyway, this one is made up to look like a kind of notebook that was quite popular in Canada when I was a kid, hence why they are calling this line of pedals the Homework series. They still sell these notebooks at like Staples and things, but they are nowhere near as ubiquitous as they were when I was young, and they were like your only option during back-to-school shopping. But it's for that reason that any Canadian like me who grew up during the 80s or 90s is likely to have powerful sentimental memories associated with them. Ditto for this brand of colored pencils, or as we say in Canada, pencil crayons. Laurentian brand was every millennial Canadian kid's go-to, and Instagram has informed me that there is a company called Retro Ontario that sells a hoodie with the package design on it. They also sell one with the little Hostess goblins, Hostess being a popular Canadian potato chip brand back in the day. I think they were the company that invented the ketchup chips that Canada has become so known for. Now, I of course am a giant sucker for this kind of stuff, so let me just show you some of the nostalgic Canadian junk that the internet has convinced me to buy over the years. This, for example, is a very cool poster featuring a big montage of retro Canadian package designs that I grew up with, like Windsor brand salt and Robin Hood brand flour. Look, I actually have some Windsor brand salt right here. It was done by a Montreal artist named Raymond Basinger, who does a lot of cool Canadian nostalgic art of this sort. I've also collected a number of knickknacks based on this iconic maple syrup can. This thing is actually from a bit before my time. I grew up getting my syrup from these opaque plastic jugs. I think that the can was more of a boomer thing, but nostalgia for it has nevertheless spanned multiple Canadian generations, and you can buy all sorts of stuff done up in its iconic look, like this candle, or these mints, or this card game, or this pillow. And then there is this shirt that I'm wearing, which features a logo from YTV, which was a popular Canadian kids station when I was growing up. Youth television is what it stood for. YTV had a lot of different logos during the 90s, and this neon green skull was the one that they'd use during after school and evening programming. I guess it was supposed to make the preteens who were staying up late to watch episodes of Reboot or Are You Afraid of the Dark feel all cool and edgy. Now, the making and selling of fun products based on national nostalgia isn't something that is remotely unique to Canada. In fact, I suspect that most countries on this planet are home to online shops selling various trinkets and baubles based on popular products and brands of decades past. For instance, another ad I saw on Instagram the other day was for a store called Mexi Stuff, which sells a bunch of nostalgia-inspired things from Mexican culture, like these slippers done up in the style of a popular store-bought snack cake, or this rolly suitcase based on an iconic peanut marzipan candy that Mexican parents might buy for their kids from one of those guys who sells you things at the stoplight. I was also pitched this beautiful poster made by an Italian artist, which apparently depicts the iconic ice creams of the unforgettable Italian summers. And it, in turn, reminded me of some similar posters I've seen advertised by this artist from New Zealand, who sells all sorts of very cool prints depicting beloved New Zealand ice creams and candies in various creative ways. And of course, longtime viewers will be very familiar with my newfound love of so-called Showa nostalgia, which is the term that the Japanese use to describe their obsession with consumer goods from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. There is no shortage of trinkets you can buy based on Showa-era stuff, but here are some stickers that I bought at the Japanese import store the other day. This sheet shows a bunch of different household electronics. This one is kitchenware, and this one is different little containers of milk, like you might get for your lunch at school. Now, one of the more extreme versions of this sort of thing is what the Germans call Ostalgie, or Eastalgia, which is nostalgia for all things associated with the former East Germany. East Germany was, of course, a communist dictatorship that was set up to run the eastern half of Germany after World War II and didn't reunite with so-called West Germany until 1990. The reunification of the Germanys was one of the great triumphs of democracy that brought the Cold War to an end, but as time has gone on, some former East Germans have nevertheless begun to slip into a bit of sentimentality about life under the old regime. Sometimes the nostalgia is explicitly political, the communist government kept us safer or whatever. But more often it is just defined by sentimental memories of certain consumer goods that were made redundant after reunification. A lot of the old communist-run East German companies couldn't compete with the higher quality West German brands, so their products steadily disappeared from Eastern supermarkets and shopping malls, a fact which would then occasionally provoke bursts of sentimental longing from East Germans who grew up in the 80s or earlier. This cool website, Aufsieladen, or Eastmart, is an online shop that sells modern recreations of all sorts of classic East German products, like this communist pasta sauce, or this old type of flour-flavored soda, or these chocolate bars done up in the style of the old East German money. I have to say, some of the stuff they're selling is so hyper-specific, it can be a somewhat unsettling glimpse into just how strong this East German nostalgic can get. Like, I guess some people must have a real powerful longing for this particular brand of discontinued drain declogger. But if the choices are too overwhelming, you can always just buy one of their giant Eastalgia boxes, packed to the brim with a wide variety of Eastalgic goods. I bet these are popular birthday gifts for East German Gen Xers. So anyway, this is a very fascinating global phenomenon, eh? The fact that so many countries are all commercializing nostalgia in such similar ways all over the world. It's gotten to the point that whenever I travel to a foreign land, figuring out what specific brands or products are at the center of their local nostalgia cult is always one of my top priorities, along with buying up some good souvenirs of it. But why is it happening? Well, I have a few theories. Theory one is just that nostalgia cults based around brands and products are a predictable byproduct of our historically unprecedented levels of material abundance. After World War II, almost everywhere on Earth experienced a period of rapid economic growth, and with it an explosion of new consumer goods. It was the dawn of the true age of consumerism, and it hasn't been around for that long. If you look at this chart from the US, you will see that consumer spending as a share of the economy had a big spike after the Second World War and rose pretty steadily after the 1980s. The numbers from other countries tend to show similar trends, so it is probably no coincidence that these tend to be the eras of consumerism that are the most heavily sentimentalized today. A guy living 100 years ago, by contrast, might have had some nostalgia for like a certain type of cookie that his parents used to buy at Christmas or something, but it would be a much less elaborate consumer nostalgia just because the consumer culture of that time was much less elaborate. People were poorer and owned fewer things, and the things that they did own were far less functional and beautiful than the stuff we have today. So it makes perfect sense for anyone who grew up in the post-war period to feel nostalgic for consumer life, because consumer life has gotten pretty good. I think it would be a pretty spoiled and decadent society that didn't have any nostalgia for consumer goods at all. All right, so the second factor would be longing for a lost childhood. Childhood is a generally happy and carefree phase of life, and we only become more aware of just how happy and carefree it is as we age. So it's only natural that we develop fond memories of anything that reminds us of that time of our lives, even relatively frivolous or unimportant things like the brand of colored pencils that we used in elementary school. Children also tend to be more grateful than adults and derive more meaning and joy from things like toys and snacks and school supplies. But what's interesting is that this emotional attachment often doesn't fade as we get older. So when we re-encounter beloved consumer goods from our childhoods, we're often surprised by just how joyful they still make us feel. Now, obviously, we shouldn't be too backwards facing. We should have faith that our futures will be full of great things too. But when a retro product advertises itself as a way to help you relive your childhood, it is making a pitch that resonates because it appeals to our longing to appreciate the pleasures of the material world in a pure sort of way. And the third variable I would identify is nationalism. Today, of course, we live in a hyper-globalized world driven by unprecedented amounts of international trade, in which a lot of our consumer goods come from giant transnational brands. Most nostalgic goods, however, tend to come from the late 20th century or earlier, when the consumer culture of most countries tended to feature a lot more unique domestic brands than today. When we celebrate those brands, we thus celebrate a period of our nation's past that was seen as more patriotically self-confident, even if not necessarily better. None of the companies that made those iconic Canadian pencil crayons or notebooks or potato chips exist anymore. They were all bought up by larger American companies, and their products were displaced in Canadian stores by American brands. Objectively, this was a good thing, since the American companies made higher quality products that have made the lives of Canadians better. But Canadians are also more than a little insecure about the degree that increased trade with the US can also flatten out some of the small differences between the two countries. So embracing distinctly Canadian goods from the pre-NAFTA era becomes a way to keep that distinctiveness alive. This is also clearly the case with those East German products. East Germany has lost a lot of its distinctiveness now that it's been absorbed into the West. And even though this has been good for the East Germans from a quality of life perspective, it has also robbed them of the pride they were once able to enjoy as a separate country with its own flag and national anthem and Olympic team and all of the rest. Re-embracing even objectively inferior consumer products can thus be a way to reclaim some of that pride without whitewashing the tyranny of the old regime. Here is another good example that I learned about recently. When India became independent from England in the late 1940s, they had this whole thing called the Swadeshi movement, which emphasized the importance of buying Indian-made products from Indian companies rather than British ones. This brand of cookies is considered a real icon of that era. It is very bound up in a lot of nostalgic sentimentality among middle-aged, middle-class Indians, both as a symbol of their youth, but also a symbol of a certain sense of old-fashioned Indian patriotism. If you go online these days, you can buy all sorts of stuff with the cookie package on it, as well as stuff with some of the other iconic Swadeshi snacks. Now today, of course, Indian grocery stores are full of all sorts of Western brands, and it's no longer seen as unpatriotic to like Oreos or Pepsi or whatever. But cookies like these, which are still being sold and still have the same package design that they've had since the 1950s, are a great example of how nostalgia, nationalism, and consumerism are so often fused together in modern times. Now, I have to confess, the purpose of this video is engagement bait. I know I have a very international audience, and I always love it when my overseas viewers give me examples of a thing that I'm talking about from their country. So on that note, allow me to ask explicitly, what are some examples of iconic consumer brands or products from your country that have become the center of little nostalgic cults in recent years? What are some products that are considered synonymous with childhood or patriotic pride, even if they're a little crappy and old-fashioned? And what are some of the wackiest retro nostalgia products that you've seen for sale? I would be particularly curious about some non-food examples, like the Canadian notebooks or the Showa kitchenware. I feel it's very easy to get sentimental about candy, but getting sentimental about a specific type of kettle, well, that's pretty unique. So yeah, give me some examples in the comments, and maybe next week I can follow up with a video with some of the best ones. Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week.